Beautiful. Okay. More milk. Okay, this is where we quit and did a lot of material on the events leading up to the war, Chambers of the United States, Espionage Act, Social Unity. And when I get to World War II, I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'll talk a couple of things, but total war is the United States adopted it right away. And so you stop total war. And you know, the U.S. is going to try to bomb industry, hurt their morale, and use terror bombing. The U.S. will do it, the British will do it, everyone's going to do it if they can have the technology. And heck, Japan's going to try to do it with big helium-filled balloons that set fires in the American Northwest, including Montana. It didn't work very well, but they tried. And all the things happen about social unity and trying to deprive people of free speech, and even the elements that led to genocide you can see happening every single country in World War II. And so that I don't need to talk about again. I'll mention it, but yeah. All right. So let's get to the Spanish flu. Let's get to the flu. And where did the Spanish flu begin? Kansas. Almost certainly began in Kansas. But everyone was at war, and there's censorship. And no country at war wanted to admit that this pandemic was ravaging their troops, ravaging the people at home. So they did everything they could to tamp this down. Spain was neutral. So when Spain started talking about this horrible flu, that's the first time people heard about it. Even though it's happening around them, they're doing mask mandates, they're cutting down transportation, people are staying at home. Same kind of stuff as, I'm trying to think of a time in history, I don't know any time, but it was kind of kept secret. And that's why a lot of people, when our 100-year pandemic came about, and people were saying, well, they didn't talk about it in World War I. Well, because it was at war. They talked about the local level. Wilson never mentioned it because of the war. Doesn't mean it was right. We don't know exactly how many Americans died. This is a number you'll see used a lot, but it could have been as high as 1 to 1.5 million. Worldwide, the numbers were so large it's hard to wrap our mind around. 20% of the people who caught the flu died, and most people were young, 15 to 40. Their immune system overreacted to try to drive the disease out and went into shock. Older people got it, and they might succumb to it, but most of them got very, very sick. And much like future diseases like COVID does the same thing, they didn't know all the other side effects. It seemed to seriously affect your heart, sometimes cause a large heart, just like COVID does to some people. It caused major circulation problems, just like COVID does to some people. So it's one of these things where they just didn't know. It's part of the reason why it makes it so dangerous. And the other thing, it causes brain swelling and sometimes cognitive functions. Wilson caught the flu right before he went to Europe for the treaty negotiation. And it almost certainly affected him. Before that, he was already arrogant. Wow, he was really arrogant. It made him even more irritable, arrogant, and refused to compromise. But I love the pictures of masks. For this one, they don't spit. It started in Kansas, almost certainly as a training camp for new soldiers. And it went to Philadelphia because Philadelphia was one of the major terminuses, the naval yard there to send troops to Europe. So Philadelphia was the first place that really hit the U.S., when it just also just overwhelmed. And they knew masks helped, but Philadelphia was slow, and that's why it hit hard. You see the mask here. Yes, they have mask mandates and mask laws. So if people think the whole thing about masks was something new, boy, we got to suffer so much through it. Not only does it clearly save lives, it also has happened many other times before. But the spit one always makes me laugh. Remember how we went through the whole thing about like washing desks and all that? And that does virtually nothing to stop it. They did the same thing here. Don't spit, no stop the spread of the flu. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. It's breathing. And as we wear our mask. And this is the spread. You can see how in less than a month, how quickly it spread the United States on the rail lines, which makes sense, doesn't it? Go back to here. Philadelphia, and then spreads less than a month. About like what happened here. And we'll see. Hopefully this isn't what happened with the British version of this. This is a mass grave in Philadelphia. So many died so fast. We saw similar things in New York City, little bits in Arizona and Texas with COVID. Now, COVID, 1.5 to 2.5% of the people die when they catch it. It's mostly the elderly or people with pre-existing conditions. I mean, that's still horrifically high. This is mind-boggling. We don't know what this did to the soldiers in the front, but can you imagine how this spread to the trenches? It must have just been hell. Or hell added upon hell. And so, here's just one more thing about this for this 1919 flu. There are 3 big waves. And so here, don't get on the bus because or don't get on the trolley car, not wearing a mask. He's arrested for not having his mask. Somebody wrote this, come tell it to the judge. Yes, keep your rooms open. And here, an anti-mask league is organized in San Francisco in 1918. Gee, all this sounds so familiar. Yes, we want to spread disease because we are so caring of other people. And 3 shot with a struggle over mask slacker. The more things change. Okay, moving on. And we'll come back to this, but the cities that did mask mandates, their numbers of Spanish flu went down dramatically. Those who got rid of them, you saw the same thing. Gee, it's just like, I'm trying to think of something. Now, it's amazing how similar it has been. But while that's going on, there's still the war. Everybody write down 14 points. You don't need to write all of them down. Just write President Wilson in January 1918 proposed a 14-point plan for war. Or for peace, I'm sorry, peace, for war. And in it, he was going to make it so there'd be peace without victory. Nobody's going to try to get spoils in a bunch of conquests and try to take advantage of their opponents. This will be the war to end all wars. It's incredibly idealistic. And that is why Wilson would become a symbol of the peace. So just simply write the 14 points. Just 14 points. And then there are a few things we need to know. The main elements are these things. Number 1, arms reduction. Stop the arms race that was so devastating. Thank you for cutting off your arm. So devastating for the years before the war. And the thing about it is all these countries are building weapons, building armies, those ships called dreadnoughts, and you build it, you use it. And so if they could limit the arms race and keep everybody's arms, no one country too strong, there'll be less chance of war. If one country gets too strong, all the other countries, especially if they see that one country is a threat, all the other countries will begin to build up their weapons, and that's why you have war. So if you limit it, which of course is really hard to do. Number 2, open diplomacy. No more secret agreements. When the Bolsheviks took over St. Petersburg, they opened up the archives of all these secret agreements that the Allies had made, promising everybody everything. From the Arabs' independence, to a Jewish state in Palestine, to Italy, this one that got everybody. Italy, in the secret agreement, was promised big hunks of Austria, this whole coast, and big hunks of the Ottoman Empire. And no, they weren't telling the people who lived there. Italy claimed that, and Italy would not get it. We're leading up to Mussolini here. And self-determination. We'll let the various national and ethnic groups decide their own fate. That's why they have right here. For example, the Balkan, we'll let them have independent countries. That's what the Balkan boundaries. And the vision of Austria-Hungary. And Turkey, and they're talking about theirs for those areas that the Ottoman Empire held to be independent. They even mentioned by name Poland. There will be a Poland. And so, this kind of fits in with this idea that the United States wanted to believe that we stood for letting people decide their own fate, thus making the world safe for democracy. We'll let them decide. By the way, you should already see, wait a second. Next. But Wilson's big issue was what he really believed in. All these other points were important for the League of Nations, an international body of open diplomacy where countries can come together and stop war before it begins. And that's this Association of Nations, eventually League of Nations. He did not make up this idea. This had been talked about for 50 years. And the thought was, they can come together and stop crisis before they become war. Or unify together. The League can unify together and stop a country that uses aggression. If you attack one of our members, we'll all join up and stop you. It was not hoping to cause more war, it was hoping to deter future wars. By every country realized if we commit aggression, the whole world will be against us. Yeah.
It's like United Nations.
Exactly. When the League of Nations ended in World War II, it would become the United Nations. But all the problems with the League would happen with the United Nations. Thus, the United Nations is really, really, really weak. Doesn't mean it can't do good things, but it has incredibly limited power. But that's another story for down the road. Next, here's the thing, though. Wilson had these basic ideas. And people around the world heard this, and they were overwhelmed. And the 14 points and Wilson are going to become a symbol for peace. Throw your pencil, first day. A symbol for peace. The 14 points became the symbol for a world without war. And Wilson came to symbolize this idea that the sacrifice was worth it. The hell was worth it. We want a better world. So even though most people didn't understand the problems with the 14 points, they just heard 14 points and meant peace. Peace. And that's what makes it so tragic. Because when the Allies saw this, they're like, you gotta be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. They saw him as naive to the point of stupidity. Didn't he understand the complexities of the world? This is totally unrealistic. This is what his allies are saying. Britain didn't fight for places to have self-determination. They fought for their empire. Do you think anybody was going to give up their colonies and let them decide their own fate? Oh, remember those maps I showed you of Central Europe and all the hodgepodge of different groups that live there? How are you going to divide that up? Let's look at this. Here's World War I after the war. Let's say World War I after the war. Here's Europe after the war. Look at Poland. A brand new Poland. Only 60% of the population of Poland were ethnic Poles. There are Germans, Lithuanians, Belarusians, Russians, Ukrainians, Romanians, Transylvanians, Moravians, Czechs. You get the point? And the second largest population of Jews in the world lived in Poland after the war. There were 50 different groups that lived here. How do you divide that up? Do you want to divide that up? So what's going to happen? They're just going to fight it out. So for example, right here, let's crack it. Yeah, right here, Czechoslovakia took this piece of land. It's all Poles. Everybody lived there speaks Polish. But the brand new country of Czechoslovakia took it. 1938, Poland took it back. 1945, Czechoslovakia got it back, and now they're part of Czechia, the Czech Republic. And just went back and forth. By the way, the interesting thing about that is Mr. Larson's wife. She's ethnic Poland, but from the Czech Republic. It's kind of those weird little quirks.
So they were just fighting over that little bit of Poland.
Yeah. Koma. So when it all came right down to it, it was like those imperial wars they fought before. So it sounded good. In fact, I think there's elements that are good, but can you do that at a peace conference after a horrible war? Whew. So, while this is going on, American troops are arriving. Part of that's spreading the food all over. The American Expeditionary Force, the AEF, General John Pershing, right here, and here he is chasing Pancho Villa. Pershing would be given command. And Pershing demanded that American soldiers, here are these first American soldiers, they're going to fight in American units. The British and French wanted just to plug these guys into their own units that have lost so many men over 4 years. But Pershing stuck to his guns, infuriating the Allies, but it's going to be a long time. Into August of 1918, where large numbers of U.S. troops can fight. And the nickname for American soldiers is going to be doughboys. You might have heard that term before. We're not sure where it comes from. Probably from the Mexican War, but we're not sure. And I've told you the term dollface and all those things. It probably nothing to do with doll faces, but I'm not sure. In World War II, it'd be government issue, GI. That's the troops in American World War II. But before those large numbers of American troops, the Germans are going to roll the die. Hindenburg and Ludendorff decided to use the 1 million troops they could take from the Russian front. As it turned out, it wasn't as many as they thought. After the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and one attack before the numbers, American, that's numbers. Anybody, when I was a kid, this was always an abbreviation for numbers. People still use that for numbers, you guys? What do you use that? But I use it all the time, and I should always ask to make sure. I know there's like other pound sign, yeah. And that's a computer thing, you know. It's weird out all this. I mean, kids out here with their you crazy kids. Okay. Hindenburg, Kaiser, Ludendorff. And that one big attack. And their plan was, over years, they have been developing new tactics along with the French. The French were adopting these tactics too. The British were behind, the Americans were way behind. Part of the reason American casualties were so high is they still did mass wave attacks of these machine guns. So it's going to be a slaughter of American troops. But, attack in March, one quick attack. In March 1918, before a large number of Americans, and they think they can knock the British out. Remember the submarine, U-boat offensive? They always think we can just attack the British and knock them out. They'll use specially trained troops that will infiltrate in between British and French defenses, get behind, surround the heavily defended places, and then wreak havoc behind the lines. Get a breakthrough. These specially trained troops, they started using them at Verdun 2 years earlier, were called Stormtroopers. And they were made by a Danish company called Lego. That you can buy Lego Stormtroopers. And here's another Star Trek reference. Yeah, I know. Yes, that's where George Lucas got the name for it too. But I think it's kind of funny how much stuff he got from World War I, but and then the fights between the various fighters. It's amazing I know this stuff, but we're all World War II stuff. So, Stormtroopers, here they actually were. Specially trained soldiers, they carried big bags, see one right here, of hand grenades. Or grenades, Americans call them potato mashers. And you got a handle. So. Naturally, what do you do with a thing with a handle on? You smash potatoes. Here they are attacking over trenches, there they are attacking into smoke, into a gas. And it worked. They attacked the British, quick bombardment, infiltrated the British defenses, got behind, and got a breakthrough. And in fact, my guess is a lot of you have heard of the term blitzkrieg, the German tactics in World War II. It was these tactics to bypass heavily defended areas, but using tanks too, and armored warfare to get behind and then cause the disruption by getting behind the line and going fast. Is that for me?
Yeah, it is.
I can leave?
Long.
Colorado's little mines. On the rock we played, the first quarterback I ever saw wear a neck roll. Okay. There's my football story. So with that, and yes. Okay, so they broke through. They broke the stalemate. In fact, they would advance 60 miles behind the British line. They nearly cut the British off of the sea. It almost worked. You can imagine when they ran into supply problems, the Stormtroopers are going to be the first soldiers killed. They tried to break cavalry through, but this shows it really well the problem with the cavalry. The areas that the British retreated through were just ruined. So that's a really good shot. It's like, we got no place to go. And once again, horses don't like machine guns. And here's the big problem. The German soldiers were told the sacrifice we've been going through is important. We are starving because of the Allied blockade. They're literally starving to death at home. Our food is horrible, but the British are worse off because of our U-boats. They have no food. All we have to do is just one hit and they'll collapse. So the Germans believe it. This will work. It's been working. We can win now. Yet when they got to the British trenches, when they got there, it shocked them. There was more food than they had seen since the war began. The British had all this food. The British had all these supplies. So the first thing they did is engorge themselves and loot. But can you imagine what this did to their morale? This hit them literally like a sledgehammer. Our leaders have been doing what? And that's the big thing. They have been lying. And if they lied about something this big, what else have they been lying about? And this, what? Exactly. You're exactly right. Here's the thing. This began to corrode the morale. It just began to corrode the German morale. So the army that had done so well, now our leaders have lied. Was it worth it? Was the sacrifice worth it? And so, the Allies finally picked an overall command. Finally, to command all the forces. So American, British, French, all the colonies, Belgium, Marshal Ferdinand Foch, right here. Here are all the commanders. That's Pershing right there. He's going to command them all. Field Marshal Foch, that'd be the equivalent of a 5-star general, if we still have those in the U.S. The highest ranking U.S. military officer is an admiral or a general. That's equivalent of 4 stars in the U.S. We have nobody equivalent to a 4. That was World War II. But Foch was not brilliant, but he understood rally the forces, hard-nosed attack, use the new tactics, defeat them. Here's a French soldiers stopping the German advance. The Germans are going to do, almost forgot. I know a lot of you are thinking, but how do I memorialize one of the great generals in world history? A back tattoo, right? Okay, no. And here are 2 things. First off, I know what you're thinking, and I agree. 5 points extra credit. 6. 6 points extra credit. Can you imagine how bad that hurts? And here's the other thing. You're going to find this out someday. She's going to get old. Skin will sag. Trust me, I'm old. I know. Imagine what he'll look like. That's why if you decide, I want tattoos, remember, you will get old. Okay, moving on. They actually had 6 major offensives. And this is the big first breakthrough. But then they figured out how to break through it, but then what? They couldn't exploit the advantages. The first American forces actually fought here at Chateau Thierry. Did pretty well, at least bravely. But the point is, they couldn't win. So they got here, and now what? Marshal Foch began to organize the forces, and they began a series of offensives just to push them back. At first, it was just Paris. But these offensives turned into huge attacks as the Germans began to collapse. And they drove them back faster than they ever dreamed. So here are German soldiers on the retreat. That's a pretty amazing shot with the explosion right nearby. Your pictures like that just are hard to take in 1918. And here are American soldiers celebrating at Saint-Mihiel. This little salient right here was taken by U.S. forces, the first full American operation, but all under the umbrella of Marshal Foch. And that's what my great-great-uncle about. That's not me. And then the Americans mostly attacked right here. And the offense was just going to push them back. And the thought was in 1919, there would be a huge offensive to end the war. And by November, the Germans were here. Not destroyed, but they were in real trouble. In fact, arguably, the Germans and their allies began to collapse. Here's the Argonne. That's where American forces attacked. Really heavily forested. Foch gave them this spot. Foch was kind of punishing the Americans. All right, if you want to attack an American unit, you get the worst place to attack. The thought was it wasn't as important. It would keep pressure on the Germans. Look how heavy this force must have been before the shell. 60,000 Americans died. It's hell on earth. The U.S. cemetery there is so big, it's hard to even recognize. So big. You see equivalent ones the size of the French, there's huge German ones right nearby. Here are exhausted American soldiers. And you can see it in their faces. So, with that, the German army began to collapse. In fact, in one day, 100,000 German soldiers surrendered. This never happened with the German army before. Look at this sea of soldiers that the British took. It's kind of mind-boggling. These are Americans taking German, here are French taking German soldiers. The German army began to collapse. Then their German allies all began to just topple like dominoes. And then the biggie. November 1911, revolution swept across Germany. It explodes into rebellion. It started with mutinies of their navy up here at Kiel and Wilhelmshaven. They've been sitting on these ships and they were told, worried about one dramatic assault against the British. And they said, no, we're not, we're done. And they rebelled, and it spread all through every major city. This is in Berlin. And that's when the German generals basically told the Kaiser, you got to quit. And at first he said, let me give it to my son. No, the monarchy's not. And then November 8th, the Kaiser just showed up at this place called Maastricht in the Netherlands, just showed up. Can I be allowed in? He was trying to get into exile. And the Kaiser would spend the rest of his life in the Netherlands. He died in 1942 after years of chopping wood alone in the Netherlands. What's ironic about 1942? Yeah. 1940, the Germans took the Netherlands. In fact, the Nazi government was trying to decide, what do we do with the Kaiser? Do we like, hey, put the Kaiser back? Nah, we just let him chop wood. So he died during the war. A temporary provisional government took power, and they had to end the war. When the Americans heard about this, there was a big party all over the U.S. Rumor hit that the war had ended on November 8th, so all over a premature party. And Americans just went nuts, the war's over! So the actual party when the war ended was pretty subdued, and I should add, using terminology of the day, this was one massive super spreader event. Because everybody said, oh, we don't need our masks, the war is over! So, spring break's coming. With that, armistice. Armistice is a ceasefire. But in essence, this was a surrender. They actually fought for many hours, some say as many as 8 additional hours, so they could get to the dramatic 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The last time American soldiers were sent over in General Bullitt's first army, the last time was at 10 a.m. Bullitt wanted to make sure that they had, or Bullard, that's our former governor's name. He wanted to make sure that the Americans had one more chance for glory. 1,000 American casualties that last hour. We showed them. Here are American soldiers celebrating the war, and the Kaiser flees to Holland. And in essence, it was a surrender, and really humiliating. The Germans had to basically give up everything to get the war ended. They surrendered in this railway car in Compiègne, and they surrendered in essence, basically saying, you have to give up your navy, you have to give up your army, you have to go home. Now don't forget, the German army was about here. So they sloped arms and marched home. Well, marched to railway stations, got off trains to their towns, and they marched to the central dispersal area in every town, and then went home. Now here's the thing. To a lot of Germans, it didn't make sense. How could our army march home in good order and look still like a real army if we lost? Did you catch what I said? This is going to begin this idea that the German army really didn't lose. Gee, I wonder if there'll be any politicians after the war that say that maybe we were cheated out of our victory. Could be anybody in Germany, right? And this railway car, you can imagine the French built a big monument, and this became a big deal. By the way, just a few years later, let's say 22 years later. Oh, lunch here. What do you have? 6 lunches, and what's the lunch for this? Oh, looks good. Corn dogs? Oh, rat. Very good. Okay, so Germany would make France surrender in 1940 in this, when a victory that never should have happened if you look into what the reality of, but somehow France, generals, lost. He made them surrender here. They took this railway car back to Berlin, and the monument they blew into powder, the Germans. And ironically, this rail car was destroyed in Allied bombing in 1945. The Allies were bombing Berlin in 1945. British and American, big carpet bombing. Remember I talked about total war they adopted immediately?
Good morning, Capitol High. Happy Monday. Here we are moving on up to phase 2. Welcome back, or welcome to, I guess, phase
70
2.
sitcom references.
This is a Monday, as we've always done. Please rise for the national anthem.
Oh, wow. We're back to the national anthem. Hands up,
flag of the United States of America.
No, let's go to the Revolutionary War. Where are you going
Which shall stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So what a weekend here for Capitol High School. First off, Science Bowl, state champions. Team consists of Mariah Mercer, Nathan Turner, Tyler Olmquist, Zach Bold, and Killian Humbert. Coaches were Mrs. Humbert and Mrs. Lunday. This was out of 22 teams from around the state. And there was a possibility that they can still compete in the national competition. So congratulations to Capitol High Science Bowl state champions. I know there were a couple of other teams participating as well. Also, speaking of state titles, congratulations to the girls basketball team, back-to-back AA state champions. What an exciting game. It was great to see such a big student cheering section as well. So good times up there in Great Falls on Saturday evening. So congratulations also to the boys basketball team for finishing up 4th this year. Great season. So first off, expectations, masks. Please make sure that masks cover your nose as well as your mouth. Please make sure and just follow the Capitol Code, follow that expectation. Here we are at the end of 4th period, so lunchtime. Here are your options. You can remain in your 4th period class, that's just fine. You can go seek assistance if you need help from a teacher during this lunch break. You can go to your teacher's classroom, like I said, if you need any assistance. You can sit in designated areas of the building. Just a reminder with that video, X marks the spot. That can be in the hallway, also in the cafeteria. We have X's already on the tables, so there's various locations in the building. Or you can go outside, but please make sure that you remain socially distanced. Just a reminder, you can take your mask off when eating, but be sure you keep your mask on until you find your lunch spot. Also, be sure to follow the Capitol Code, pick up after yourself, and throw away your garbage at the end of the lunch break. Spring sports start today. Orchestra concerts tomorrow night in the auditorium. Here's Marin Chapman with some other announcements. Have a great day.
Good morning, Capitol, and welcome back. For those of you who haven't heard from me since last March, or really ever, I am your senior class president, Marin Chapman, and I am here with your Monday announcements. Expectation of the week: be respectful by looking out for one another and encouraging good choices. If you are taking AP Government next year, you are eligible to go on a trip to Washington, D.C. in 2022. If you're interested in finding out more, please visit or email Mr. Zarnowski. There will be an informational meeting on March 23rd that your parents and you can attend to find out more. Mr. Zarnowski needs to know that you are interested to invite you to the meeting. Girls Track, please meet in the auditorium dressed out at 3 o'clock today to get started for the season. Make sure that you have your concussions and physicals turned in. Thanks, have a great day, and go Brew.
Okay, so remember, everyone, you just go down to Mr. Haller's room and eat lunch, right? We got that clear? Does everybody just barge in? If you, let me add one more thing real quick. This is one regiment. This is one regiment of about 800 men, Scottish regiment for the Edinburgh Castle in Edinburgh, 1914. All that's left in 1918. And one more thing, you have to write this down and just do it. This generation we call the lost generation. Everybody. And so many people die. So you look at how most died between 18 and 30. So you have this whole generation that so many young men died or never the same. That's why I put down these are Germans, but this is in every country. Look how many people lost limbs. So, and then write down the treaty for inside out real quick. Now, fortunately, as luck would have it, you didn't write that down, so you got 2 seconds to write it down, or I get a phone. Quick, chop, chop. Go! Oh, okay, who wants to eat outside? It's like 70 out here. If you want to eat outside, you can spread out, go on the little hill, Partridge Knoll out there. And that's right, I figured out Partridge Knoll. If you want to eat in the hallway, you might have to raise so you have to sit in front of the exits. I can run anybody out if you want. If you want to grab your lunch, go ahead. If you want to sit in here, that's fine, but you can't take your mask off. So you got to figure out how to eat. I guess and bring a blender next time. Now I tell you what, wrap pieces with. Go ahead. But please spread out. Well, I guess I better come here then. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I don't know what you want to do about the school, but the campus is really cool. Oh, wait. Where are you going? You gonna spread out along the wall, or are you going outside? Outside. You have to go in the little field. Okay? I'm just gonna bring. Yeah. Now you do. Where are you guys going? Going. No, it doesn't work that way. You go outside? Okay, go. Just us.
Yep.
How's the lunch?
Lunch.
You got another one if you want. Someone took
Fine.
them. The room is yours, don't break anything.
I'm out of it.
Take roll. Put the seating chart up, I forgot to take roll.
Take the roll.
Fourth period, I didn't take attendance.